All right, so if you are a coach trying to grow your business, you have stumbled across the right video. In the video coming up, it's a raw clip taken from my Marbella Mastermind that I just run. And I'm about to show you some hidden dynamics of the market in any coaching or consulting business that very few people understand or take advantage of. And when you do, your business, the growth of your business, your sales, and the amount of money that you can make per client as well, and the amount of sales you can make are able to really increase. We're going to go into two things: maximizing LTV, maximizing the lifetime value of every single client, because if we can do that and you can double your LTV, you've doubled your business. And also maximizing your market share, having the right things in your offer stack so you can actually sell to way more people of the market. And you're going to understand the setup of the market and why actually tapping into these things is so important, and 99% of coaches never do so. Also in the video, you're going to see an example of how I was able to take a coach that was doing 8K months and get him to do a 9K week, because he asked me one question: how do I double my business? And the answer is in these clips. So before that, we're going into something pretty important, which is maximizing market share and LTV. Now, as I said, I was doing these at 2 a.m. in the morning. So I had to take, usually I would have made that look a little bit better, but I had to take my very quick scribbles when I was planning this out way before and just use that as the screenshot. The reason why we do this, right? Everything in the world, when there's something that you can, like, there's a metric to it and everything else, ends up kind of forming a power law. So like Josh said earlier, just there, that 80% of a golfer's revenue or whatever, like money that they make, comes from 20% of their 20% of their competitions or whatever. And I'm sure on the same thing, this graph shows on golfers' income. There's like loads down here making barely any, and then there's a tiny percentage at the top that make a disproportionate amount more than everyone else. And it's going to look like this if you look at like cities in the world. There's a disproportionate amount of people that live in a small area of space, and then there's like less people spread out around the world, if you understand what I mean. Same with boxers' pay or MMA fighters' pay and everything else. It looks like this. So when we understand that in the market, we understand that although it feels like this is the safest place to be, there are always going to be people that are willing to pay disproportionately more than the majority of people. And there's always going to be a disproportionate amount of people that are willing to pay less than the majority of people. This is the mathematics of why we want to actually think about this. And sometimes you can be surprised at, what people would like to buy when we can give people the chance. Like I remember when I was a fitness coach, and I had the physiotherapist who was as an online client of mine, but because I was in the game of like only one offer, blah 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 blah, he was asking me for more. Everyone was paying the same, and he was asking me to go deeper with me. He was asking me that is there any way that we can do more stuff? And I was like, no, because that's my offer is this. He would have paid at least double, probably more, to do a deeper work with me. There's always going to be the opportunity there. Sometimes we just need to actually tap into it. But this is one of the most useful things that anyone can actually look at. So some of you may have heard this kind of story before, but one of my clients asked me the question of, theoretically, how do I double my business? And I said, and I'm going to bore you guys with this if you know it, but I said, well, there's two ways to double your business. It's not necessarily messaging or anything else, because it's a mathematical question, right? Like, how do we get this number to double? And that is a mathematical answer, which is, well, you can have double the amount of clients, or they can pay you double the amount, right? There's two options. And the thing with a lot of us in coaching, especially when we've been indoctrinated to think one offer, one price point, blah, 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 is no one is ever thinking about increasing LTV, lifetime value of the client. And it is one of the most useful things to think about in your business. It's one of the simplest and easiest ways to start making more money. And it's also one of the most important when we look at scaling. So, you know, me and Ollie were having a conversation yesterday about his ads, and he just shared it in front of everyone, right? So he spent 2,600 on ads and he made 3,400 back or something like that, right? 700 profit. So he's profiting a bit, but obviously there's a lot of work to do on the back end for that money. Yeah. But then when we look at where they were going through, the simplest thing was the LTV just isn't high enough, or at least is how fast we can actually get this. So we looked at, for him, the acquisition was okay, and then we just need to, on the back end, we just need to be able to make much more, ideally on the front end, especially when we're talking about ads, because you want to be able to get that money very fast so you can invest it back into ads. So the client that I was just talking about, he asked that question, right? We had a look into his business, and his LTV was around £700. So he was crushing it in client acquisition. He had like 80 clients at one point at its maximum. But when we zoom out and we look at the average, most of them were paying £700. So he was doing all of this stuff. And by the way, he was paying for ads and everything to be able to get these clients, paying him £700. So to go from £700 every single client pays you to 1,400 is not that difficult, you know? So for him, the answer for doubling his business was we double the LTV. So we looked at his process. He had ads go into a free challenge, go into a 6-week thing. All of that was working really, really well. After the 6-week thing, they'd go into like it might have even been like a £120 like group offer on the back end, right? And that was it. Everything was working, so we didn't want to tamper with too much. So all I told him was, instead of doing £120 and overall that's ending up giving you about £700, let's charge at least, because they'd already paid him like 200 or 300 to get into that first section, let's charge at least £1,000 and get at least £1,000 on this first call. So then, but once the time that they've worked with you for 6 weeks or 6 weeks and 1 day, they've already paid you £1,300, if that works, which means that you've already doubled your LTV just with that. So what we then did is we looked at how he was selling. He made the normal tier, the low tier, the normal thing for people to enter. His higher tier, he was like talking about that like it was like some special thing that barely anyone goes into. He didn't have a very clear offer. He was just looking at the logistics of it. He was like, we can have more calls in this. The thing with more calls is most people don't understand why that's useful, especially if it's like fitness clients or something. They don't necessarily attach a value to that on its own. So number one, we made that higher tier the normal thing for people to go into. So from his next call, he brainwashed himself to think everyone goes to the high tier. It's strange if people go to the low tier, first of all. And then everything in his language and the way that he speaks about it, and even pre-framing it all the way through the section that they go through before, was all speaking about that higher tier. The second thing is then on this higher tier, he created a clear process. So instead, and a promise. So instead of having just extra logistics, you can have more calls, my WhatsApp or anything else. Each one had its own clear promise. I think for him, his promise was personal to the person because they'd just gone for an acquisition offer. So because he knows where they are, he designed in his head very quickly, sticking to the offer matrix, a clear promise for like a 3-month time frame or maybe 6 months, a clear process on how that's going to work. And as he spoke about the process, he then spoke about how all the logistical pieces that they're getting allows that process to happen, right? All of this stuff culminated in usually doing around 8, 9 or 10K months. And recently it had been closer to like the 8 mark, not the 10 mark. All this culminated in about 6 weeks later, he had a 9K cash collected week because he just changed these things. But that's what I want you to understand. Nothing on the front end changed too much, right? He wasn't making any more sales on the front end. Nothing else changed there. It was what we're doing with the sales that we're making on the back end. And almost all of us here, right, we have clients, and most of us are just sitting right in the middle here. And there's so much more where we can take people. So let's look at this. There's 2 things. Maximizing LTV. And when you've got more clients, there's just more opportunity to be able to do that. And again, most people don't. Most coaches just think about retention as a way to increase LTV. It's not the only way. And then also maximizing market share. How can we take more people off of the market and get them consuming our stuff and working with us and at least paying us, right? So we've got 2 parts. Most people hang around here, right? So most average offers, some are lower, some are higher, but they're most around here because most people think when they're only allowed one price point and they're only allowed one offer, which most people have been indoctrinated to believe, most people think, well, I don't want to work with these like tiny price people, or I'm not going to be making much money. Yeah, maybe I could get more, but I'm going to be really busy. I'm not going to be making much money. And then they think, well, I'm not going to go for this high peak of people that are going to spend loads and put my price really high because there's way less of them. It's harder to find them. So what do? Everyone makes the seemingly logical decision. I kind of go in the middle. Yeah, I'm going to go in the middle where I'm charging a decent amount enough, but a decent amount of money that most people are going to be able to pay. And that's why everyone falls here. Which is also where the argument comes in of like, if everyone's battling for this section of the market, there's an argument for, do you want to go really high? Do you want to go really low? There's an argument for like the middle is the worst place to end. And people talk about that being restaurants, you know, middle of the line restaurants may not do as good as the top end and the bottom end, like McDonald's and stuff like that, right? And you can see that maybe in fashion and stuff like that as well, like clothing and stuff. But what we want to look at, because we can have it all, that's the difference, right? When we have a multi-tier offer, when we allow ourselves to have different offers and different things, micro offers and everything else, we want to look at how can we maximize everything? How can we take the clients that we've got and maximize the LTV of every single one? So every single one that's coming through can pay us more in a win-win situation. And how can we maximize the long tail? So all of those people, which is going to be, by the way, like the vast majority of people that at this current point are not willing to join here and definitely not willing to join anywhere around here, how can we still make money from them, which is nice, which also brings them into your world and often out of the market, and then also often indoctrinates them so they are actually willing to buy here and they are actually willing to buy here as well. So what we want to look at is where is your biggest opportunity right now, looking at this, and how can we tap into it? We're going to go into like strategies for both sides, so we can go real deep in a second. But I just want you to ask where the biggest opportunity is. For most people, the biggest opportunity is going to be maximizing LTV, because we don't want to build a business that we don't want. We don't want to cannibalize things as well. We don't want to rush to do these lower people. If you've already got clients here, and you can, you've already got clients here, that there are going to be some in there that are willing to just pay you more money. You guys are a bit different.
We're going for the green light?
Yeah, you guys started here.
Yeah.
So technically, like, what's the...
For every single person. So LTV, like I said, 2 ways to double a business, right? One is the LTV. So a couple of ways that we can do this. You can have a done for you offer, right? If you've already signed up a client and they're already in your world, is there anything that you're able to do for them that they can pay you more for? Is there anything like a 6-week consulting offer? So one of the things that you can do, let's say, Lloyd, we'll take you for example, with your clients, right? If you're selling them on this idea of high performance, one thing that you may be able to sell them is a 6-week consulting offer where you go really deep into one aspect of health once they're bought into it, where you can, yes, exactly, blood work, or it might be some crazy gut health thing, or it might even be the mind thing, whatever else, right? Like if that's already part of the culture and they're used to it, or it's part of the aspirational identity.
Do you mean get them in on the front end on this, or is this like when they're in?
It can also be a front end thing, but more so on the inside. Yeah, once they're in and they're paying you $250 a month or $300, or
That's included in the service. I go to the blood book and they just pay for the blood test. So I know that's just an idea, but
yeah. So whatever you want to do, but like if there's something that you know that you could go really deep on them for 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, or whatever it is, and they can pay extra, and you can go really deep into these things, then you want to add it in. And by the way, most